You're listening to Solar Insiders, a fortnightly podcast that shines the light on the world's biggest energy source. Solar Insiders is presented by Giles Parkinson, the editor of Renew Economy, and Sophie Vorath, the editor of One Step Off the Grid. And Solar Insiders is brought to you by Pylon, the essential solar design tool to grow your solar business with quick and effortless proposals that will impress your customers.
Hello and welcome to this latest episode of the Solar Insiders podcast. My name is Giles Parkinson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Renew Economy and editor of the EV-focused sister site, The Driven. And joining me, as usual, is Renew Economy editor and One Step Off the Grid editor, Sophie Vorath. Sophie, I trust you are well and finally sort of averting your eyes from the Electoral Commission website, counting votes and seats and things.
Yes, I no longer have a view of a Tim Wilson poster outside my window, although he's going to be our member anyway. But yeah.
In your face?
In my face, it was quite something.
Well, cheerfully enough, he's nothing if not dogmatic, and he's going to be pushing the case for nuclear. So that's very helpful of him. Yes, I still remember the first time I came across Tim Nielsen. I'm not too sure quite why he's described as a moderate, because he was working for the Institute of Public Affairs as their sort of chief climate policy person, which was just basically his role, as far as I could see, or when I saw him, was going around the United Nations climate change conferences, listening to all the climate deniers, like Lord Monkton, spew their stuff, and I think he wants a front bench role. So God help us if it's an energy.
Yeah, we'll watch that space closely. I mean, here we're thinking maybe we've heard the end of all that nuclear stuff, but perhaps not.
Well, perhaps not, because if some of the things that Labor did promise in the election campaign, like this $2.3 billion home battery scheme, if that gets going and is done well and is done properly, then that's going to kind of change the game even further towards this distributed grid. A grid, as Daniel Westerman from AEMA pointed out last week, is not going to be focused on baseload, and we're not going back to it, he insisted.
Yes, and look, I can't see how after another 3 years at the minimum, the ship could be turned around. It was already looked like a completely mission impossible now, so I can't see how that wouldn't be a thing, but, who knows what goes on in the minds of. Absolutely,
yes, yeah. Well, look, just to sort of wrap up on the election before, because we've got a great, you've done a great interview with Myles Eftos from Amber Electric, talking about battery storage and integrating that and how to get customer minds around it. So we'll get into that shortly. But just to sort of wind up on the election thing, look, it's good, as you sort of say, that we're not going to have to sort of be dealing with a government, a pro-nuclear government right now. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Labor. They've got such a thumping majority, and the Greens, sadly to my view, and the Teals, equally sadly to my view, haven't done as well as hoped, and the Greens may only have one seat. The Teals not quite as many as we would have hoped. Our hopes for minority government are far away from being delivered. It's just a question of whether Labor flatters to deceive again. And we often put so much hope in Labor, and we're often quite disappointed. So they've got this wonderful opportunity to basically sail through 2 election cycles and really be quite determined about climate policy and energy policy. Now, whether they're going to do that remains to be seen. A couple of red flags for me was their sort of thinking that their support for the salmon industry was justified by the election result, which I'm just going, well, hang on. And then Albanese's decision to negotiate the Environment Protection Authority with WA Premier Roger Cook. So, God, you do fear for the machine taking over.
You do. I mean, we've got sort of hope in the Senate. I think Pocock says it's always a marginal government in the Senate. So there's, that's good. But yeah, I think we just have to hope that Albanese is true to his word. I remember he said in an interview, which I watched, it'd have to be years ago now, 2 years ago, that when asked what was, what he was most proud of so far as part of his government legacy, and he said climate change, action on climate change. So let's just appeal to Albo and say this is your moment to really put yourself in the history books, I guess, or not.
Yes, that's right. And you're going to get into the history books and make your legacy by actually being ambitious on climate policy, being ambitious on renewables, and not just by shouting at the minor parties.
Yeah, and not being everyone's best pal.
Anyway, look, let's hop on to the good news. Rooftop solar and battery storage are the two sort of, we've said it so many times, are the strongest part of our energy revolution at the moment. And now we're going to see a focus on battery storage in households, which hasn't been as strong as grid-based battery storage. So tell us about your interview with Amber and why and wherefore.
Well, I think it was a really, really nicely timed. I couldn't exactly say I planned it that way, but I might. But yes, because they are obviously experts in home battery storage, because they are one of these retailers that is connected to the wholesale price. So it basically, not for everyone. The best kind of customer for them is the customer with solar and a battery, because they're already trying to encourage this behavior from consumers where they store their solar and keep it for use when the market is peaking and when everyone's switching on every appliance in the household. And also they can either, at that time use their own power or sell it to the grid. And there are, occasionally these events which can earn people quite a lot of money. They're very, not all that common, but certainly that's one of the considerable perks, is that essentially they can act like a little tiny power station and send their handful of kilowatts into the grid at a time where prices are really, really high. And Amber basically charges a fee, a set fee for their customers, and then everything else is kind of at the mercy of the wholesale market. But what people like Myles Eftos are doing, and he was described to me as the staff engineer and evangelist at Amber, is really like getting down into the weeds of all of this and working out how to optimize this the best, how to do it so that perhaps people who aren't necessarily super interested in following all of this stuff and changing their behavior can also benefit. There can be programs that are in place so that while you carry on your day-to-day, your solar and battery could be doing all sorts of clever things for you and earning you money, but at the very least saving you a huge amount on your bills.
Okay, let's have a listen to your interview with Myles Eftos from Amber Electric.
Myles Eftos, welcome to Solar Insiders.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Now, you were described to me as the staff engineer / evangelist of Amber, which means that you must be the head guru, really. But I thought we'd start by you letting us know what it is that Amber does and what it does differently to most retailers out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Amber is an electricity retailer, but we're a little bit different because we offer our customers the wholesale price. So as a retailer, the price that we pay for electricity generally isn't the same price that most people would pay. There is a price that to generate power, and then along the lines, there's a bunch of other prices that get included on top of that. Regular retailers work out what that average price might be for the year and will charge their customers that value. What we do is whatever we get charged for power is what the customer gets charged. And so the flow and effect to that is that in summertime, when there's lots of sun around and the price to generate electricity is very low, our customers get really, really low prices. And in winter or over dinner time, when demand is quite high, the electricity price will go up. And for our battery customers, we have an automation platform that will automatically discharge batteries to the grid to capitalize on that higher price. So the prices change every 5 minutes, which means you need to be a little bit on the ball, but you've got the opportunity to get really cheap prices and to get really high feed-in tariffs, which no other retailers can really offer.
Does this mean that your offering is really mostly only suited to people with batteries, or are there other configurations that can work?
Look, battery customers are our ideal customer, but you're willing to put a little bit of work in and think about when you use power throughout the day. Customers who don't have a battery or may just have solar can still work quite well with Amber. Um, Generally, the prices don't jump that much from one 5-minute interval to the other. And so there are blocks during the day which might be cheaper or more expensive. And so if you're able to shift your usage around, put the dryer on in the middle of the day, for example, rather than at nighttime, you can still do quite well with us.
Yeah, which I think is speaking for myself, is something that certain proud solar owners like to do and brag about and annoy their entire family with. So not unheard of, but perhaps not for everyone. I did notice when I was having a bit of a look around on this Reddit thread that one customer of yours said that he, in one event, I think it was a Sunday, not a Sunday, an evening in Sydney, and he said where the whole of Sydney turned their air conditioners on. He said, I basically paid for my entire electricity for the month for my house and my car in that one event. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about here.
Absolutely. So those are called price spike events, and they're not that regular, but they do happen often enough that for our battery customers, it makes quite a bit of money for them, because the wholesale price can actually go up to $16 a kilowatt hour, or nearly close to 20 at the moment, actually. Whereas normally it's 20 cents. So if you're exporting to the grid at 5 kilowatts for an hour at $16 or $20 a kilowatt hour, it's a couple $100 to be made during that time.
So essentially your house is a tiny little power generator out there on the grid.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Earning as much as, say, the coal plant or whatever. It's fantastic. I thought we would have a look now, because the sort of, with batteries been around obviously for a while, and their uptake is increasing, but we've had talk in the last couple of months, and we're all hoping that if we might get a federal battery rebate, which could, really change the game for a lot of people who may be sitting on the fence about getting a battery, or even sitting on the fence about getting solar. It could mean that they go in whole hog. But I have seen, as a result of that, there's been a lot of sort of opining in the mainstream media about, is it really still worth it, even with the rebate? Can you justify the cost of a battery? Does it pay off in time, and give you enough return on your investment and cut your electricity enough that it makes it worth it? And, I just thought this is a good question to ask you, the evangelist. What do you think? And then we can sort of, after that, delve into some of the specifics.
Yeah, it's a really good question. In terms of battery payback life in general, there's a couple of components to payback. One, the obvious one, is not having to pay for the power that you're using off the battery. So particularly if you've got a solar system, being able to charge that battery during the day for free and then using that power later on when the sun's down, there is savings there. And generally, the sort of general rule of thumb is a 10 to 12-year payback if you're just doing that. With Amber, we're seeing an extra $2,000 to $3,000 of savings a year.
Wow. Okay.
And so over the lifetime of the battery, that can bring the payback period down to 7-8 years. So it's reducing that payback period by quite a bit. And it's unlikely to see power getting cheaper from here on in. So, making an investment now at the current power prices from regular retailers doesn't give a full picture of what the payback period will actually be as prices get more expensive over the next few years.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, there's the savings as well. So, you're thinking of the sort of payback, return on investment, but I think what people sort of forget to think about is that over that time, your bills will be so much cheaper, and in fact, in some cases, you might even end up with a slight a credit, yes. And in that sense, that relief on cost of living pressure and that sort of not having to worry about it and, is kind of priceless in a way.
That's exactly right. And there's also other flow-on effects as well as more and more residential batteries come into the network. Networks are able to reduce their fees because they don't have to maintain as many transmission lines. We can rely on less generators external to our local area. So there's a bunch of flow-on effects of things getting cheaper, or the cost of delivering electricity becoming cheaper as more residential batteries enter the network.
Yeah, for everyone, for people who don't have the solar and the batteries as well. Now, does size matter is my next question. I'll use myself as an example. So at the moment, I've got a really tiny solar system. I think it's 3.3 kilowatts because I have an uncooperative roof. And it still does wonders for me. I work from home and I do all those things that you mentioned. But, is it even worth someone with a system my size getting a battery? Is that kind of a size battery going to be any use for Amber or for virtual power plants? What matters with size and other things like that?
Yeah, I'm going to give a really annoying engineering answer, and it depends. But generally, I mean, if you're looking at different houses, obviously have different power requirements. And as we electrify more and more of our houses, obviously the amount of power required to power them goes up. Um, there's a, a nice dance that happens between solar and batteries. Solar during the day will generate a lot of power. And so having a large solar system, even with a smallish battery, if you're able to move a lot of your consumption to during the day, if you do work from home and have an EV and you're able to charge your EV off solar, that is going to be beneficial. On the flip side, if you're using a lot of power at night, having more battery capacity than solar makes more sense. So it really does depend on your usage patterns. But for Amber customers, our sort of ideal profile would be someone who has just enough solar to run their house during the day and to charge up whatever battery they have, and to have a battery big enough that will get them through the night.
The peak.
Yeah, exactly. So, and with a little bit on top so that we can export to the grid on top of that as well. So you're effectively becoming almost off grid, but with a little bit of extra so that we can export that power over those peak times to make a bit extra money from the battery and solar system.
Yeah. And aside from, we have this hardware there, and behind all of that are the smarts and the things that you have your hands on, the optimization and all of that kind of thing, artificial intelligence. There's so much sort of going on in the background. How are all batteries sort of made equal in that sense, or is it more up to the inverter? Is it more up to the retailer like you guys you'll probably provide a lot of the optimization yourselves? How does that side of things work?
There's a lot of nuance and complication, but in general, any new inverter that you'll get installed in Australia now will have some level of control on it. And generally the inverter is the thing that's in charge of the battery as well. There's some exceptions to that because certain batteries don't have solar. For example, old Tesla Powerwall 2s are battery only effectively, and they've got their own inverter. So if you've got a solar system and that, you need to control both. But generally we talk about control of the inverter. And so anything that's relatively new will be controllable. With actually the team that I'm on at the moment is working really hard to try and get more and more batteries compatible with Smart Shift. We need to do a bit of work to make that happen. But yeah, well, you'd be able to anything, as I said, anything fairly new will be fine. older batteries and solar systems sometimes won't be controllable. So we are seeing a lot of customers who have an existing smaller solar system wanting to buy a battery, and we'll be able to control the battery, no worries, but we might not be able to control the solar component of it. And solar control is actually quite important for us, particularly if you have a bigger solar system. The prices over summer quite often actually go negative because there's so much energy in the network that the generation price is below zero, and that will mean that if you're exporting solar on Amber at that time, you're paying to export your solar, which obviously we don't want to do.
Not ideal.
No, the best solution is to use it, but there's only so many things you can turn on during the day. And so in that situation, we'll actually enable what we call solar containment, where we instruct the inverter to limit the amount of power it's generating to match your household exactly. And so for inverters that we can't control, obviously we can't do that. So, for those customers, we do recommend trying to use up as much power as possible. But yeah, so it does matter. We've got a list of inverters and batteries that we're compatible with, and as I said, we're trying to expand that list quite aggressively at the moment.
So tell me about Smart Shift. That's the software at your end of the equation, and that is basically hooked up to the customer's system and just making sure it's either storing or exporting or importing at the right time.
Yeah, so we sort of holistically are known as a VPP or virtual power plant product, and there's quite a few of those out there, but our one's a bit different because we're actually optimizing the power use for your home rather than other VPPs where they're trying to optimize a fleet of devices. They might control 1,000 or 2,000 devices all at once.
And doing grid services and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. We will actually try to optimize your battery's use for your exact use case.
For the customer. How crazy.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you're right. Like, and Amber, the only money we make is off our subscription. So there's a monthly fee that we charge. So we actually don't care how much power you use. In fact, we want you to not use power because that helps us move towards our goal of 100% renewable energy use. If you've got solar panels, we would love you to not be interacting or importing from the grid at all. In fact, we want you to export. So we, our system builds up a model, an AI model of your household usage, so we can kind of guess over the day how much power you're going to be using. We also look at your data from your solar panels to work out roughly how much it's going to be generating over the day. And then we pump that into what's called a linear optimization algorithm, which is a fancy way of saying we go through lots and lots of different scenarios and pick the one that makes you the most money or saves you the most money. And then that becomes the plan. And we do that every 5 minutes for every customer that we have. And we push that plan up to everyone's battery and solar inverter. And then that plan will tell the battery to charge from the grid if it's really cheap, or discharge to the grid if it's really expensive, or maybe preserve charge because it's worked out that you've put your oven on and we want to make sure there's enough battery power left in the battery overnight to cover the morning peak. So and we, as I said, doing that every 5 minutes to every customer individually.
Wow. So if somebody's in the middle of, like the evening peak and they decide to chuck the vacuum on and vacuum the stairs and then have a cup of tea, does that completely mess up everything, or is that just all gets taken into account?
I don't want to say it messes anything up. It will cause the algorithm to recalculate what it's doing. So rather than exporting to the grid, it might decide to stop exporting so that it can redivert the power to your kettle. So that you've still got enough battery overnight to hit the morning.
Okay. And can people, inadvertently wind up, pumping up their bill without sort of realizing? Is there a way that you can send them a message if they're doing that to say, hey, maybe put the vacuum down?
We will send alerts out when prices go over certain thresholds. That's configurable in the app. Smart Shift's usually pretty good at working out what's going on and trying to take evasive action to save you in spite yourself. But we also in app will show you what you've done recently up to 5 minutes ago, so you can kind of catch when you are using if you have been using a lot of power during the day. And we've also got a live power view in there as well. And all your usage is there the next day, so you don't have to wait for your bill to find out how you're going for the month. We'll tell you every day.
I can see a lot of wacky dad memes coming out of this.
There's a few. They're usually targeted at me, to be honest. But we also offer an API for our pricing as well. So we've got a large community of developers who have done their own automations at home and have set up those alerts and set up lights around their houses that change color when the price changes. In fact, I've got about 3 on my desk right now. So it's amazing looking at what our customers have done with that and all the crazy harebrained things they've got little dashboards on screens to tell them what the price is and all that sort of stuff.
So what would you say, like, do you find that most people are pretty keen to be engaged? I guess with Amber, that would be a bit of a given, not necessarily for everyone, or do you feel people sort of grudgingly get involved? What's your feeling about engagement?
Up until I started working with Amber, I don't even know if I could have told you what my electricity retailer was. And I would say that most people, that's probably the case. In terms of like our customer base, we have some of the most engaged energy people we've ever met. Like the number of people that will tell us about how much they love us as a retailer, and that is just mind-boggling, because who loves their electricity retailer? So a lot of that comes from the goal. Like, we are very values driven. We genuinely want to get Australia and the world to 100% renewables, and that's what we're not doing this to drive profits and margins and all that sort of stuff. That is our goal. And by us giving control back to the consumer, like, they're becoming involved in their energy choices, which is something no other retailer can really offer them. So yeah, we do find our customers are really engaged, almost to a fault, constantly getting emails from people saying,
Put the app down.
yeah, exactly. Or, hey, this thing didn't work properly, and, getting really angry, but yet they still stay around because they really believe in the product.
Yeah, and I guess they're part of it. So if you can give that feedback and it results in something and it's being listened to, then fantastic. For those people who aren't engaged and have no interest in doing all of that, with your experience in, all the technical side of things, do you see it's going to be a decent future for those people as well? They're going to be the offerings out there that suit sort of everyone?
As we automate some more of those larger ticket items, you can think less and less about the other things. So leaving lights on in, modern houses all have LED lights, which don't really draw much power. A lot of the appliances in the home are now becoming much more efficient, and it's really a lot of the large energy draw comes down to a few big devices like air conditioners and EVs and pool pumps and hot water systems and all those sort of things. As we automate more of those so that the customer doesn't have to think about their use of those things, it will become much easier to not have to be addicted to the app, to always be looking at prices and just get on with your day. And obviously with a battery and solar to a degree, that becomes a lot easier as well, because we're taking care of topping up when you're using a lot of power, so you don't have to think about it.
And do you think that the broader industry is going to sort of be forced to become more consumer focused and more consumer friendly in this whole shift, or will some be dragged kicking and screaming?
But we're seeing a lot of refocus on the consumer from places that traditionally haven't done it, like networks. They've got a vested interest in making sure the network is stable and that we're not drawing too much power or there's not an excess of power. And so they've started looking at more consumer friendly ways of dealing with that around automation and control. Whereas traditionally they would deal with that with manipulating prices and that sort of thing. And so I think as for us to deal with climate change and all of those sort of things, as consumers, we do need to become more aware of what we're doing and when we're doing it. So um, I kind of like to turn that on its head, and I think they've got an obligation to do that because that is how we make sure that we are combating the climate change. If they're going to do that kicking and screaming, well, then that's on them, really.
It's a bit like recycling, like we don't just all throw our rubbish into one spot anymore. We do that and it's not such a big deal and it, makes a bit of a difference.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a big change, right? Like if every person did a small change, even if they're not on amber, like it does matter when you use electricity because, you know, at evening, we are relying on non-renewable sources. If the wind's not blowing, we do have to have, at the moment, coal and gas going. As more batteries, including big batteries, come into the grid, that becomes less and less of a problem. But we've all got a responsibility to think about how we use energy.
Now, we spoke a bit about the batteries that you can use with Smart Shift, and you said you're trying to get more and more on. And I just wanted to touch on a story that I wrote today about Sig Energy's Sigen store. I'm not sure whether I'm saying that correctly. Their 5-in-1 battery that it's the story sort of is it's just based on some monthly data, but apparently they've basically gone to the top of the pops in the market share in March from virtually nowhere. They really only they launched in Australia, I think, in 2023, and I think their single phase batteries only got CEC accreditation in March, last month. So it seems like an amazing trajectory, but they also seem like an amazing product.
Yeah. I was over in China for a large solar and battery expo and was hanging out with a bunch of installers, and one mentioned, hey, there's these new kids on the block, Sig Energy, we're going to go do a factory tour. Do you want to come along? And was just amazed with the quality of their work from a user point of view. Like they're talking about really consumer centric companies. Like everything they've kind of designed from a user experience point of view is very user centric. And so, and the hardware seems really, really great. One of the reasons I was really excited about it and wanted to try and get it on the platform as quickly as possible was their 5-in-1 charger has a vehicle to grid EV charger option. And the system's stackable, so you can buy just one battery component and then add more on later on.
Up to nearly like 50 kilowatt hours, isn't it? Something like that.
Yeah. It's really probably one of the biggest step changes we've seen in hardware. And don't get me wrong, like a lot of the other manufacturers are starting to catch up on a lot of that stuff, but they're definitely the leader in the new way of thinking about storage. So yeah, like I'm not surprised that they've sort of gotten up to the top of that ladder pretty quickly. But yeah, we're very excited about that. As I said, particularly from the vehicle to grid side as well.
Yeah, because that's a whole nother sort of frontier for Amber, I suppose. If you've got these very, very, very big batteries on wheels in driveways, that's another thing that you can optimize.
Absolutely. So vehicle to grid, we're doing quite a bit of work with that right now. There is some additional user challenges because it's a dual function device. Yes, it is a very large battery, but also you do need to drive the kids to school and get to work. So it's not always plugged in. We need to encourage people to plug it in at the right time so that we can support the grid and make them a bit of extra cash. Our perfect user for that might be someone who potentially drives their car to work. Maybe their work has solar panels on the roof and free EV charging. Plug in, charge there, go home, plug it back in, and then they can support the grid from home.
Right. That is a perfect scenario. Yeah. Wow. And how many customers at the moment do you have with EVs and batteries? Is there a big proportion or?
Yeah, Australia's a little bit behind on EV penetration, but we have, unsurprisingly, a large percentage of EV users. I haven't got the numbers on me at the moment, but we do hear a lot of people have both or thinking about getting both. You've also got people that will just buy the car and will plug it into the wall using a slow charger that may not be controllable, which means that they will have to think about when they do that. But we are seeing an increasing number of people who are buying faster chargers that on the wall that are controllable. So, we're working on an EV automation at the moment that will talk to the battery automation as well and be able to coordinate those two things to make sure that, if you said you need the car in 2 days' time, make sure that gets topped up whilst keeping a battery charged for use of the home as well. So we see that as a really important piece, even without the vehicle to grid part, even with unidirectional, it's still an important energy asset. If we can make sure it's charging at the right time, then we can, consume that lovely solar energy that at the moment we're unfortunately having to curtail because we haven't got anything big enough to pump it into. But a big battery on wheels is super useful for that.
Now, and how regularly, if you've got to add a charger to your house, how often, do people have to sort of upgrade their whole switchboard kind of thing? I know that I'm really sounding very limited in my intelligence now, switchboard kind of thing. But yeah, I had a friend who's had one installed and they had to sort of take care to add a whole new kind of, I think, gateway type setup.
Generally, what happens with EV chargers is they will need to be put on a separate line. Like, that doesn't mean you need an upgrade on your switchboard or the line coming to your house. It just means that they need to put an extra switch in the switchboard. So if you've got a big enough switchboard already, it generally will just be the cost of the cabling to the charger. That can be a little bit complicated depending on where your switchboard is. For example, my switchboard is just in front of me here, and my car is parked all the way at the back of the house. So I had to run quite a long line and trench under some garden beds to get the cabling out there. But if your your car spot is quite close to the switchboard, that may be quite an easy run. It all does come down to the amount of electrification you have in the house as well. Most houses would be okay with, a air conditioner and a charger, maybe not going at the same time. But it's when you start adding induction heaters, induction cooktops and those sort of things where you're going to have to start thinking about upgrades to three-phase.
Okay. Well, that's a bit of a nice segue because you talked about your charger setup there. I was going to close by asking you because I heard that you are also a battery customer with Amber. So, maybe if you could talk to us a little bit, as much as you're comfortable, about your own setup and how it's been working for you.
Yeah, sure. So I've got 7.4 kilowatts of solar and a 9.6 kilowatt hour battery with a 10 kilowatt inverter. Over summer, we can quite happily run just off that. If we're running the air conditioning, we will chew through the battery pretty quickly. We've got a 7 kilowatt central air conditioning system. So we can run that for about 2 hours off the battery before it's depleted.
Not too bad.
It's not too bad. now that we've just got an EV as well, like that, we've now got contention as to whether, if we need to charge the EV and it's a hot day and we need to charge the
What gets
battery,
priority?
what gets priority. So in a perfect world, I would probably double my solar capacity, and maybe double the battery. But it's one of those things that, when do you stop?
I know. In the meantime, you can just sit in the car with the aircon on.
Exactly. I'm waiting for those vehicle to grid chargers where I can just go plug in and just have it out of the house for a couple of hours over those hot times. And I'm in Victoria, so winters are pretty gloomy. So it's probably not getting close to $0 bills in winter, but over the year, like our price, the price we pay for electricity is pretty low. So yeah, and I just let Smart Shift kind of do its thing. So
you're not ordering family members around and stuff?
I do have multiple lights around the house that do tell people about different prices. And my wife does occasionally ask me whether it's the right time to put the dishwasher on, which I do need to sort out an automation for. But yeah, generally we just get on with our lives. Like the only time I really think about it is if we are going to use the oven. We unfortunately haven't got still got a gas stovetop. We're waiting for that to die, so we're going to replace it. But yeah, we've got the electric oven part of it, and so if we've got to cook that, I might go check the price just to work out at what time I start it. But again, with the battery, usually don't have to think about it too hard. But yeah, it's when we've got to charge the car and charge the battery and run the air conditioning that it gets a little bit interesting.
Yeah. Can you set things up where people just can't turn them on? That's what I want to know for my children. Where they just can't turn the air conditioner on, even if they want to.
I can, but I'm not sure that's for normies.
No. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's probably not to be recommended.
Yeah, I do have some air conditioning automations that are in the works at the moment as well, but I haven't quite tuned them quite correctly yet.
I think this is a very exciting, brave new world, and I personally can't wait to get more involved. But I just also hope that we get to a point where there's enough clever people like yourself who are automating everything, so that even people who haven't got the means or time or inclination to think about it can really sort of get the most out of consumer energy and smart use of energy.
It's such an exciting area at the moment. When I do go to conferences and expos, go and talk to all of the smart people that are doing this stuff. There is a lot of people working on it and who are really passionate and really want to make it work well all around the world. So yeah, I think we're getting there. Like it's going to be an exciting space to be in over the next few years.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing some time to tell us about what you guys are doing and how you're helping with all of that. And I think we're going to have to check back in with you if there is, after this weekend, let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if it all goes well, I'm not sure I'll have time to talk to you. I mean,
Yeah.
might be too busy.
Yeah, you might never be able to sit down again. But yes, fingers crossed. And thank you again. And we'll speak to you again soon, Myles.
No worries. Thanks for the opportunity.
And that was Myles Eftos from Amber Electric. It's really interesting because sort of Amber's kind of at the cutting edge of this sort of the retailers, I guess you could guess, who are just truly and wholly focused on consumer assets, because that's basically all they're dealing with, and they've just learned a way of sort of trading that and sort of dealing with that. I guess the bigger challenge is going to be for the sort of the big legacy retailers who are kind of looking at Amber with great interest, but it doesn't quite suit the way that they run the rest of their portfolio. So it's going to be one of the biggest challenges, not just for the incumbent retailers and the utilities, but also for the policymakers and the regulators to kind of unscramble this egg and kind of make sure that as we adopt more rooftop solar and we adopt more battery storage and we all buy electric vehicles over the next 5 to 10 years, how that actually looks and rewards the consumers who are providing all these assets and doesn't penalise them.
Yeah, exactly. And it'll be, top of the charts in the NEM review. And there's also really interesting things happening in South Australia, as we've talked about before, with SAP and Engie. So yeah, I think amber's not for everyone, and they'll be the first to say that. And I think, that's another thing that we have to think of, is that there will be a mix of these kind of offers, some that are geared to people who are more willing to sort of really get in there and participate in the market and, for different reasons, and others who want to just not think about it at all. But as you say, the key is we have to make sure everyone can benefit in that situation, and that people who don't really want to engage aren't sort of left out. And I think another really interesting thing about amber is that it's quite different from other retailers that offer VPP products, in that some of the other ones, including some of the big gentailers, focus on households becoming part of a big group of small generators that can help offer grid services and that kind of thing, and that's how they kind of are rewarded. Whereas amber is all about the customer. They're not really fussed about what's going on the grids so much. They just want to be able to use what's going on in the wholesale market to work for consumers. So that's sort of their real focus.
Indeed. Look, let's wrap up with a couple of interesting points of data. I think both come from Sunwiz. One is about the level of rooftop solar installations in April, which was down. I guess we can say that was uncertainty ahead of the election, or possibly also because there was some long weekends and people decided to go and have a barbecue or a camp and visit or something.
Easter eggs.
Holidays. Eat Easter eggs. But the other interesting one was the ranks of home battery suppliers. So
Yeah.
Sungrow have been doing very well for the last couple of years. So has Alpha ESS. Tesla, who you kind of would naturally think as being the leader, as one of the leaders, is kind of in the top three with the Powerwall. But there's other ones that's kind of emerged from nowhere. Sig Energy, to steal, at least for 1 month anyway, the top ranking. It's been pushing up there. It was only kind of launched less than a year ago in Australia. The company was only founded about 5 years ago. A former guy from Huawei who was unhappy with the way that company was going and kind of went off and set up its own thing. So they're really interesting, kind of turning the table. So it just sounds like another leap forward in that particular technology.
Yeah, I think one of the most attractive things about it seems like they've had a really clever marketing campaign for starters, but they've also got a really great product to market. And, what I guess is telling is that, as well as it being on the top of the sort of manufacturing, the brand sales charts, it's also gets big raps from installers. So it's been on the sort of top of Solar Quotes, does those surveys of installers of, asking them which battery they would install in their home if they could choose. And yes, Sig Install was the one that won this year. So it's really ticking a lot of boxes. I think it's easy to install. Evidently, it takes sort of minutes to install. It has I think what they're calling this 3-in-1 capability, where it has capability to add an EV charger already there. So,
not just that, vehicle to grid as well. So it does bidirectional charging, and it's already sort of got approval from Essential Energy, which is the biggest network in New South Wales. So it's happy with its technology. So clearly, yes, it's fair dinkum. So that's pretty interesting.
Just got to wait for the EV makers to give their blessing.
Yes. You may use our batteries.
But yes, so it's a big deal because there's quite a lot of charger products that don't offer vehicle to grid and that have been around for a while, and to have this product that does all of the above. It offers backup if the grid goes down. It's got some pretty flexible sizing all the way up to sort of nearly 50 kilowatt hours. So yeah, it's seems like a really good product, and it's pleasing a lot of people. So we will see. Perhaps it will just become the top of the pops. But yes, it did push Tesla's Powerwall into 4th spot, which we're not going to say anything about Elon.
No, don't mention that. Yes. Okay. Well, look, thank you very much for that. I think that's probably a wrap for this week's episode of the Solar Insiders podcast. Thanks, Sophie, for your contribution and for your interview with Myles Eftos from...
We should stress, I wanted to mention, we should stress that the interview with Myles was done just before the weekend. So you'll have to excuse me talking about if Labor gets up and if we get this battery rebate, because it's happened. So that's great. And one other thing, sorry, Charles, was I did want to just give a little shout out to Kane Thornton, who has announced his resignation as the CEO of the Clean Energy Council. He's not leaving straight away. He's leaving at the start of August. But it's a big news for the industry. He's been a CEO for 10 years and at the organisation for 15. So he's ridden the roller coaster for real.
And kept smiling all the way through it, which is quite... even when he falls off his bicycle, which has happened a couple of times. So although we didn't actually see him the last time he fell off his bicycle, so it might not have been smiling quite so much. But yeah, no, look, that's a that's a reasonably significant moment for the Australian renewables industry. So congratulations to Kane. It's going to be really interesting to see who comes next.
Yeah, I had a lovely chat with him yesterday, and that's all in our story. If readers would like to go and have a look, he had some really interesting things to say. But yes, be very interesting to see who takes over and if they can continue that strong advocacy in this really important next phase.
Indeed. Okay. So thanks once again to you. Thanks to Myles Eftos from Amber. Thanks, of course, to our sponsor, Pylon Energy. And thanks to everyone listening out there. And we'll be back with another episode of the Solar Insiders podcast within the next fortnight. Bye for now.
Solar Insiders was brought to you by Pylon. Pylon provides easy-to-use solar design software for solar installers and retailers with pay-as-you-go pricing, no monthly costs and no lock-in contracts. Join Australia's top solar companies who trust Pylon to design high-resolution, CEC-ready solar proposals.